I'll just say good evening and welcome to this program, Veteran Identity and Homecoming as a Lifelong Process with Travis Martin, PhD. I am Heather Pritchard, librarian with Tates Creek Branch Library. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for what you've done. You have certainly been helpful to me.
You're welcome. So, go ahead.
All right, I'm Travis, Dr. Martin, T-Dog 5000 in a former life. I was a teacher and a former Army veteran. Here to talk to you about veteran identity and homecoming. And specifically, I want to talk to you about new ways of thinking about veterans as people and about new ways of welcoming them home. So that's me. At 18 years old, my friend Tiff, who actually did the cover of my book, made that picture for me. It was one of the backup options that we had. And that's the truck I drove behind me. It was my barracks in Germany, and that's my unit in 2003. And so she kind of made that all into a collage for me. We ended up going with the other version, though, because it was so much prettier. I'm really into dogs. I have an Anatolian Shepherd named Bartleby, an Australian Shepherd named Glory, and they're really prolific on Instagram someday. Not yet. And as I said, I'm an Iraqi freedom veteran and author of War and Homecoming. I've also been advocating for vets for about 15 years. I started as a student. When I first got out, I started EKU Vets, which was a student club. From that, I founded a class that was meant to help returning vets in college. And from that, created a journal to help them kind of work through that process of transitioning, and myself, because I was a very young vet at this point. And started kind of studying in my English major the use of literature and artwork as a way to kind of understand and grapple with the process of homecoming. And so I initially did this in the classroom, and I did it with what we call the Journal of Military Experience, and expanded that to a nonprofit called Military Experience in the Arts. I just was really busy for about a decade, and the long story short, it was all about helping vets tell their stories and ensuring that people listen. I always told vets helping them put their best foot forward to do that, because it's hard to tell your stories sometimes. You're all here to talk about Bartleby and Glory, right? Aren't they pretty? They're missing me right now. They're probably tearing on this stuff. So, no, we can always go back to that, like if I get stuck, but for real, we're here to talk about how veterans are perceived, how those perceptions shape veterans' realities, like in real ways. I'm not just talking about like ideas in the sky, but how little subtle things can influence how a veteran thinks that we see them, and how that can influence their actions, and how over time can limit people in some ways. How do we see through that? And what can we do about it? Because we all have a role. So I am going to zoom in on this a little bit so y'all can see it if you can. Anyway, I'll just kind of give it to you the best I can. So thinking about different ways of looking at previously commonly held concepts like stereotypes. A lot of times when I give these talks, people can get standoffish whenever you talk about things like hero or wounded warrior in ways that are critical. If you're just talking about military service day to day and ways that you only use reverence, or you're only looking at the veteran as a victim class, then dealing with those kinds of ideas and grappling with them conceptually can be really hard. And so stereotypes, the way I use that word, means an incomplete rendering of identity. It's a way of looking at a person that's not really full. So you think about a hero. Well, if we say all veterans are heroes, we don't know all veterans. You know, some veterans do downright dishonorable things. And some vets think it cheapens their service to just lump them all together and say that, you know, we're all just going to say we're all the same. So stereotypes can be like a double-edged sword. It can be used to boost up or, you know, promote a group, or it can be used to cut down or debase a group. Veteran identity is not, you know, as simple as saying, you know, people who used to be in the military. I say veteran identity as a way in which people describe themselves through the context of their military service. It's one of many intersecting identities. So a person's not only a veteran. Just the way a person's not only defined by their race or their gender or their socioeconomic status. You got to step back and really look, you know, at how those things come together to create a unique picture. And this is the kind of like deep understanding and contemplation about the veterans in your lives that it takes really to welcome them home authentically. Veterans possess what I think is a symbolic authority, and that's the ability to comment on military service, the things they did and the things that were done. The things that they fought for, basically. They have this innate authority. People listen to them. People respect them. Typically, when the military is put up alongside other public figures or entities, their trust rating is way high. And because, for good reason. You know, the military, for the most part, is a pretty open, inclusive entity. It tends to be on the cutting edge of social movements, and veterans themselves tend to advance social movements when they get back. So people think highly of their veterans, and I'm certainly not here to challenge that. What I am here to challenge is whenever that reverence takes the place of a real community, real conversations, real empathy, real affection, real understanding, and over time, how that superficialization or I call it aggressive superficiality, how that accumulates. And so veterans have this symbolic authority, I argue, and they tend not to use it because of these unconscious and conscious pressures that make it easier for the vet to just stay quiet. And a lot of that takes place in this what I call patriotic myth making. So this is like the way we describe ourselves as a people. It's the way we describe our country. And there's always a push between groups and entities to make their description the primary, the one that everyone agrees upon. The problem with that is there's no two groups or people that are going to agree upon anything like that. It's your experiences are your worldviews are defined by your experiences, and individuals don't tend to experience the world the same for lots of reasons. But whenever veterans come into play, they tend to have their identities marshaled or used as part of some sort of political maneuvering to make statements about larger society, because veterans are from, ideally, a cross-section of American society. That's not always a thing that veterans want. It's not always something they realize is happening to them. And a lot of times it's downright nefarious. So being able to catch that can be a really good way to advocate for veterans. Just calling it out when you see it. We'll point out some examples as we go. So authentic communication, I've said that before, as any interaction in which the veteran is afforded the opportunity to exercise their symbolic authority. You're not telling them what their service means, they're telling them. And they're not using, you're not limiting them in terms of what that meaning can do. You're basically giving them a platform and an opportunity to discuss it, because so often vets tend to get drowned out through the myth making, through stereotypes, and through superficiality. Homecoming then is not something that happens in the first few months after military service. It's a lifelong process, and it's one in which veterans learn to articulate their lives through the lens of service. Questions or anything so far?
Glad I'm not in college. I don't think I've ever keep up. College is many, many years to go.
Well, here's some stuff that you're not going to have to do in any classes or this is some stuff that really kind of stood out to me whenever I was researching and writing about veterans over the years. Just some concepts that I want to bring up because they really highlight the value of this idea of veteran studies that I helped to champion about 10 years ago at Eastern. So, for example, we've probably heard of authors like Sebastian Junger or Carl Molantes. Junger was combat correspondent, served in Afghanistan famously, and did the documentaries Restrepo and I can't remember the name of the other one, but Carl Molantes, a Vietnam veteran, wrote What It's Like to Go to War. And they write about purpose and communal bonds. Junger, in particular, compares veteran culture to tribal cultures, the Native Americans, and how they would regard warriors and war fighting, and how whenever veterans returned home, there was a place for people, there were rituals, veterans had a special place in society, and rightfully so. Today, we don't really see that. I don't anyway. We regard veterans with reverence, pride, all of these things, but there's really no serious attempt to get from them their knowledge and use it to better society. And typically, it's the opposite. Veteran culture and things are typically only associated with violence and crime and terrible things that happen during war. But the more you look at veteran culture, military culture, and you start to identify its collectivist leanings, and you start to identify the ways in which people in the military look out for one another, and how that sense of purpose drives an individual. There's a lot that a larger society could learn from veterans that we don't really tap into. And that's a problem, I think. So moral attitudes towards war and killing, and again, the veteran, when they don't get a chance to talk about war, when they don't get a chance to talk about service and really for themselves say what it meant to them, other people are going to fill in the gaps. They're going to say it for them. And so what Zefferman and Matthew actually looked at was like a pre-industrial society, tribal society, in which they hadn't really been exposed to any concepts like PTSD or anything like that, but they had pretty much like an approximation of war in these cattle raids. And what they found in the research was that these tribal people, whenever they would come back, their depressive symptoms of PTSD would ameliorate. They get better a lot faster. The aggressive or the hypervigilance related symptoms, they would tend to be about the same, but in terms of like what you might associate with moral attitudes towards war, grappling with that internally, moral injury, that tended to get better faster among these people. And Matthew and Zefferman thought was maybe that's because of the attitudes of that society towards war, killing, and veterans. And maybe that helped them get better faster on average. Certainly a lot more research to be done there. O'Neill is an example of someone researching how veterans' perceptions of themselves impact their workplace performance. I have read this article. Civilians, when they were put in a situation where they were asked to describe to people what it means to be a veteran, and then that definition was challenged, they found an interesting trait that people would push back, even when given correct knowledge about what it meant to be a veteran, if it didn't go along with what they already thought. Even when the veteran themselves would tell them, it didn't matter. When people have a fixed set in their head what it means to serve, that's tied to a larger national narrative of how they see the world. And to challenge that veteran, which they see as a symbol, challenges the whole thing. And so people can get really upset really quick when we talk about these things. And again, my idea is just to get people to step back and look at the individual, think about what they're going through. There's one more I wanted to do. Group in Alabama, the Veterans Media Lab, Scott Parrott, David Albright, some people down there I've been working with. We've been researching veterans' portrayals in the media, like Twitter or newspaper articles or media, things like that. And what we found was that, or what Parrott found in an article rather in 2019, was that there were veterans portrayed predominantly in 3 different ways in social media: as charity cases, heroes, and victims. So you can think about examples of veterans being portrayed as heroes. It would be like a news article in which the theme, in which the presentation is very much a positive portrayal of military abroad or whatever. And then you have victims. It's veterans coming home facing all of these dire problems at the VA. Articles like that. And charity cases, usually like veteran gets a house, veteran gets a car, veteran gets a puppy, things like that. Those are very simple narratives, and if that's the only way you see veterans as victims, charity cases, and heroes, you're not going to be able to relate to the human being sitting across from you. You're not going to be able to empathize with their experiences and their pain if they come to you, and they probably won't, because you won't be signaling them in the way that says I'm open and I'm willing to listen. So here's a little comic. It says, the reporters, so do you Vietnam veterans wear your hats to gain attention from the public or to compensate for homecoming you never received? You may think that's a gross simplification of how people view veterans. Surely nobody thinks that. They do. And the more I encountered this in academia, in the nonprofit sector, it was that so veterans were being used to attract students, to attract donor dollars, to attract recruits, to attract this, that, or the other. And it's like the VA always says, Abraham Lincoln referencing that, people aren't going to join the military if they look at their veterans being treated like crap. That's a gross paraphrase. I don't think Abraham Lincoln said it that way. But all of that is just to show that portrayals of veterans have both personal and social meanings. And so there are barriers that I see put in place in the ways we interact with vets on a fundamental level. Barriers to communication, barriers to understanding. And so here's some examples just in the way we talk about service. Real veterans don't like to talk about it. I've heard that before. And so then the vet who needs to talk about it hears that, and they say, well, that need that I'm feeling to talk about it makes me weak. It makes me not like the veterans who came before me, and certainly reflects on my generation, people like me. And so that in itself is very damaging, I think. And who are these real veterans? Who decides that? That's an interesting question. Most people that I've actually talked about have been through really harsh combat situations, don't go out of their way to denigrate other people when they're coming out and talking about their service. Other people will say things like, we can never understand what they've been through. And what good does that even do? It's a pointless, meaningless gesture. It says, yeah, military service is hard, but it also says, I'm not even going to try. It says, even if you come to me and you try to explain it, then it's beyond me, but I just don't really buy that. I really don't. I think the things that happen in war, even the horrific things like murder and rape and destruction and psychic wounds, these are things that happen to people outside of the military. Are they the same exactly? No, but we can learn from each other, the military veterans and the civilians. And that understanding of trauma at that extreme in war could come back and be used as a source of knowledge rather than this closed off island that we won't even try to assail. Now imagine just how much is being lost in terms of our collective healing.
I don't think that's much different than me trying to understand what it's like for a woman losing her child. I would never understand how that feels.
Right.
So I think the same as someone trying to understand what it's been like to understand my story. I don't think they could.
Do you think that's kind of a cop-out, though, when understanding is a necessary part of what the veteran
I mean, I think it'd be better served to explain it to somebody that's largely been in the same situations, that's dealt with the same situations in a different way, and
right.
They have resolutions in different ways that can give me advice on how to deal with my personal injuries rather than somebody that's dealt with something completely different and doesn't understand my story.
Let's parse that out a little bit. Let's not assume that everything that veterans talk about is related to their trauma or psychological illness or anything like that. I'm talking primarily about human communication, one-on-one. A lot of veterans will say, I only want to talk about the harshest things, combat, stuff like that with other veterans, and that's fine. But let's also think about that critically again and look at the global effects, the cumulative effects. If we only limit discussions of war and trauma to therapist office, closed spaces, and other communities, that knowledge is not getting disseminated out to the mass public, and they don't learn about those things. And if they don't learn about those things, they can't. It's not the place of every veteran to educate, especially when they're first getting back. But it's also the place of society to want that knowledge and seek it out as a way out.
On the flip side, if we tell everybody about our traumas, then that compounds the fact that all veterans have traumas. Where you said that the public looks at veterans.
That's assuming that's all veterans talk about.
Right. So if veterans started telling everybody about the traumas and injuries and moral injuries, if we talk more about it, it would make it look, it would compound the way the public views those injuries rather than.
I think that those stories are already being told and amplified to a degree that the average veteran who doesn't suffer at the extremes of veteran experience gets drowned out. We don't even get a chance to observe a positive veteran identity to the detriment of people who are struggling and looking for someone to model. And so I agree with what you're saying, but I think that if you change the way we look at this, it won't just be stories of trauma. That would only be, 30% of vets who go to the military go to war. 30% of those get PTSD roughly, and then how many of those are medicated and doing well in society? We assume that there's this mass army of crazed vets. That's not true.
Is there a way to celebrate the average normal veteran more to where it's they don't see, obviously the veteran that's injured, lost his legs, deserves the attention because he's been through what he's been through. But just showing that makes it look like everybody's been through that. Or if we celebrate the average veteran, it makes it look like that's the extreme, and it puts him on a higher pedestal. The ones that, injured one that's been through the extremes. The average celebrates the average normal veteran, on a daily, just veterans
I'm
day.
not about celebrating. I'm not complicating.
Not celebrating, but on the news, they just bring in and interview the ones that have been through that, rather than just I was just in the military. That's all I did.
Yeah, complicating. Making people see there's not just one way of looking at military service and what it's like. It's not just that veteran. In the hypothetical example you used, it's myriad veterans. You have no idea. Veteran identity is a very fluid thing, and everybody seems to think that it's just an infantry person with a gun. And often, military service is many different things.
Well, I mean, okay, so I just recently heard on the news, and I may have talked about this when we last met, that less than 1% of the United States population served in the military. Of course, we went from the draft to an all-volunteer service, 73, maybe it was. In any event, so, especially considering that the world is very fast-paced, very, most people are out living their lives, whether they're addicts, alcoholics, or normal people, in a very self-centered way, so that it would take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and the right strategy for, the level of acknowledgement, not celebration, but acknowledgement of the average veteran, or whatever the hell that is, to take place. I mean, seriously, I had a chip on my shoulder about this to some extent, I guess, when I was, honorably discharged back in the day, but it's grown over the years to where the chip on my shoulder is pretty big, even though I'm not that worthy of a veteran or not a combat veteran or whatever. But I see it in, like you say, the blow-off statement, thank you for your service, or the blow-off statement, I can never understand what you've been through, and all those kind of things that are just these platitudes and self-serving statements that end the conversation before they even begin.
Yeah, and it's easier. It's the path of least resistance. I'm not saying you can't say any of these things. I'm saying that for some people, that's all they say, and that's their rule. That's their go-to, because it's easy to avoid those hard truths about what people go through in the military than to allow that to be a part of your day-to-day thinking. That's what I'm saying.
But today's point, in 1980, 18% of Americans were veterans. Today it's 7%.
Right, increasing among the same families too.
That's the difference. It's right. In place of thank you for your service, I say thank you for your sacrifice, and it's not your sacrifice because you went to war, because you suffered, because of that. It's you sacrificed your time, your 4 to 6 to 12 years as a growing up, being with your family, your friends, things that others enjoy staying home doing to go serve your country. And you weren't out partying and doing things that your peers were doing.
That's great. I mean, that's how you.
I see that as sacrifice, not sacrifice. Going to fight and getting shot, that's a sacrifice, but not everybody did that. Maybe their sacrifice was just not being with their family, maybe losing their grandma and not being there.
That's a great point of view, Jason. But I'm going to say this: don't project it onto the vet, because already in your attempt to thank the veteran, you're projecting your point of view onto them. You're saying this is how I feel, and I want you to understand that. You're not really listening.
No, I think every veteran is sacrificed. Signing up and being away from your family in some way they've sacrificed. I don't know in which capacity. In some capacity they've made a sacrifice. So that I'm thanking them for your sacrifice. In whatever capacity it is, that's what I'm thanking them.
Okay, you're allowed to do that. There's certainly nothing wrong with thanking people. People will say anyone who puts on a military uniform is a hero, or they'll say, like, I support the troops in general. All these things like this, again, whether it's good, bad, or in between, it's sending a simplified narrative message. It's saying that I can make this platitude, this phrase, in place of real communication, talking to them, or at least just saying that you're open. We haven't gotten to what that actually looks like yet. So I have an excerpt from my book that I'm going to read. I'll try not to be too pretentious about it, but as you're listening, I've got some things up here that I want you to think about. And in particular, I want you to think about transition experiences. So I'm going to talk about going from combat to Kentucky in about a day. And I want you to think about what it might have been like dealing with, not Dr. Martin. I'm talking specialist Martin at that point. Just really dealing with grief and anxiety and lots of confusion and trying to navigate the roles of brother and citizen and veteran, soldier and Christian and family member, all these different things that are going on at once. Think about that. And just think about maybe how someone who doesn't know that's happening to them might react. Patriotic rituals. So I'm not going to be talking about parades here or anything like that. This is like one-on-one exchanges like we've been talking about. So think about that in the story. How might those symbolize, what might these symbolize collectively? How might they be understood by the veteran receiving them as opposed to the civilian or the other veteran giving them? Authentic communication, what did I say that was? I said it was any chance in which the veteran has the opportunity to comment upon their service themselves, not to have that meaning given to them for them to perform, but rather to be the leader of that conversation. And look for any stereotypes, such as hero or victim. All right. So this is from the book. It's from a section called The Veteran's Symbolic Authority. It was April 2005. I had 2 hours of sleep when I woke up to my platoon sergeant standing over my cot. He asked me to go with him outside of the tent where we could talk in private. Initially, I thought I was in trouble. I had left some sensitive item in the Humvee following the previous night's mission. That wasn't the case. As we exited the tent, entering to the sunlight beating down on that patch of desert just north of Najaf, Iraq, I recognized our platoon leader standing next to a stranger. Specialist Martin, Somerset, Kentucky? Asked the man I did not know. Yes, sir. When was the last time you talked to your family? I don't know, a month or so ago, sir. My platoon sergeant asked, do you have a brother? Yes. I looked up at the stranger to see a cross on his lapel. He was a chaplain. I knew immediately that something was wrong back home. I didn't have time to guess what it could be. Your brother is dead, son. The words were followed by what felt like a physical punch in the gut. It took 3 helicopter rides and an airplane to get me out of Iraq. In 24 hours, I set foot on 3 continents, and I still miss the feeling. And that's what it's like to get a Red Cross message while at war. I tell this story because it put me in a rare position. I was yanked out of war and sent home with no preparation. I was not wounded, nor had I completed my 4 years of honorable service. And when I changed out of my uniform, soiled with sand and sweat from weeks in the field, or more accurately, the desert, I looked and sounded like everyone else. Still, I was different. And it was at this point in my life, based on the way I was treated, that I first recognized that difference. Everywhere I went, war was all anyone wanted to talk about. They'd bring up stories heard on the news, and I would respond with either clarification or affirmation. But I soon found they preferred the latter. Do you think it's worth it? Friends would ask. Acquaintances would inquire if I knew so-and-so, as though everyone in the military is on a first-name basis. A distant relative once asked if I'd ever killed anyone, making me so angry that I could barely speak. I could only excuse myself and mutter obscenities in the driveway. It became the first instance of the same question repeated by those who gleaned their understanding of war from movies like Full Metal Jacket. I was more forgiving when kids would ask the question, but adults? I thought it plainly offensive. Perhaps strangest of all, amid the grief inflicted on me and my family by my brother's death, I received displays of patriotism in place of the type of sympathy commonly shown to those who's lost immediate family members. After sorting through my brother's belongings because my parents were unable, I hear, thank you for your service. Even in my brother's memorial service, held at church a few days after his funeral, people went out of their way to tell me how proud they were of me. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I didn't want to spend my leave walking on eggshells, afraid to break with others' perceptions of veterans. I wanted to be left alone to grieve. I felt like my veteran identity was hurtful to my family, that the focus should have been on my dead brother. Then, after 2 surreal weeks of performance, I returned to Iraq, where no one wanted to talk about war or the military. My feeling of difference continued in the years immediately following my discharge. I'd spent 4 years overseas, learning to spot threats and maintain an aggressive demeanor. I learned to associate dead animals on the side of the road with bombs, angry looks with aggressive posturing. I predicted an ambush. We drove with guns pointed out of our windows and mounted on the tops of our trucks. On the back of every vehicle, a sign, stay clear, 50 meters, deadly force authorized. Even among friends, because of the hyper-masculine, sometimes violent nature of the military, it was common to see fistfights on a daily basis, beatdowns we call them, in which one endures an onslaught of fists and boots from 10 to 15 platoon mates. These were sanctioned rites of passage for the newly promoted birthday gifts, off-the-record punishments. Now, veterans often return home having spent years on edge, honing the hypervigilance attributed to post-traumatic stress disorder as a means of survival. They come home and find dad wants to arm wrestle. Code workers code switch, speaking what they think is a military dialect by raising their voices and puffing up their muscles. Teachers tiptoe around the topic of war in the classroom, or they defer to the token veteran's opinion as though every GI Bill toting private is an expert strategist or general. The religious tell them to pray harder when violent thoughts select sins. Veterans try to explain their loved ones the pains of being different. They confess what must be dirty, violent thoughts and attribute them to the past. But the only advice they're given is to forget all about it and start living in the present. So they try, and they find that soon people won't let them forget. They'll forever be reminded of a past that indicates their difference. Within the American unconscious is a script to which veterans must adhere. Okay, so back to these questions. There are these things I asked you to look for. I ask you all to think about these things from the excerpt that I just read. Did you, on the transition experience, I'm this is happened to me, I'm an open book about it. I'm not going to like break down or anything. I'm ready to talk about this if you want. What do you think that might have been like? Going, like I was doing patrols the night before in the top of a gunner's hatch up towards Iskandariya, Iraq, near the Anbar province. Then 24 hours later, I'm standing in an independent Baptist church outside Somerset, Kentucky, and all of that going on. What am I going to do?
Well, I mean, our transition of that blatant extent, such a short period of time, it was a lot of pressure. And, you know, I mean, the first thing you have on day one boot camp is conformity, right? But, you know, at that point, my opinion or thoughts about anything don't mean anything. Because we're in training, we have an objective to accomplish in a short period of time, get us ready to go to the fleet or whatever. And so, you know, the transition from, you know, a combat scenario back to a situation where, you know, you're in the Bible Belt and you don't, those people, for the most part, probably meant well, but they weren't of a mindset to take a deep dive into what it must be like for you. And so, I don't know that I've experienced anything like that. I didn't have any emergency to come on for the death of a loved one or something like that. All that I can, you know, relate to is, you know, coming home to mom and dad after my single term of enlistment and starting over, and it didn't seem to be too difficult, but I did not have friends or family inquisitive or coworkers inquisitive of what my military service was like. You know, my dad being a World War II combat vet, as you and I have discussed, his experience was such that he shut down altogether about it. He wouldn't talk about it, at least with the family. And, you know, despite the fact that I didn't understand his military experience, I always respected him and admired him for it. And not just in my military service, but in other aspects of my life. It was, you know, Dad was my hero or my role model, and I wanted to, you know, follow in his footsteps. I don't know if that's useful. It's just
No, those things, being your model, role model, your hero, that stuff all exists at the same time as your dad being a dad. It had nothing to do with the military. And so when I'm talking about, I think, with regards to patriotic rituals, the next one is that, you know, the first thing I did when I got this news about my brothers, I went to the bathroom and just sobbed alone. Because you didn't really do that in front of your buddies and stuff. You want to look tough. You're only 21 or something. But, and you think, like, if you look at the scenes I described, like, every time someone regarded me as a veteran, it disregarded my grieving as a human, as a brother. And it got in the way of what could have been a more healing exchange for me. Now, I'm not saying these people were bad. I'm not saying they even did that. I'm just saying, like, take that and apply it to other situations that are less extreme, where a veteran needs to have an exchange in which that they get to define themselves in the exchange. If it gets interrupted by the ritual or the platitude, then it doesn't happen at all.
And I guess I never really thought about it until now. I guess I kind of had a similar experience when I was in Korea. Got to call it. My grandpa was one glaucoma, and they gave him well till the weekend. And, they got me Red Cross flight, so came home. It was a couple hours after I arrived home, almost like you waited. But it's been 2 years since I've been home, and it was almost like when I got home, everybody was like, "Oh, it's good to see you." Like, you know, how's the military? How's California? How's Korea? Like, you know, rather than, you know, oh, I'm sorry about your grandpa. You know, I know you haven't, you know, got to see him or, you know, talk to him much in 2 years. And it's more like, you know, disregard the going on now. Let's just chat about where you've been, what you've been doing.
It's like chit chat. It's not substantive, right? It doesn't really educate anyone or build any lasting understanding between two individuals. It's placeholder for authentic communication.
I'll make a quick comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've noticed among some of my friends, particularly my part-time handyman helper, that people will make that if the subject of my military service comes up, or if I bring it up, which I don't, at the conscious level, I don't think that I bring it up a lot. Somehow it seems to come up. I could be wrong about how often I bring it up. But others will make the comment, well, I tried to join, but I couldn't get in. You know? And I'm not one of them big on wearing hats and t-shirts for it.
Thanks for your almost service.
Thanks for your almost service, yeah. So I did wear one of my Navy caps today, but I saw a shirt, I guess it relates more to getting benefits from the VA, whether it's, you know, disability, retirement, or whatever. But I thought it was cool. I didn't buy it. And it says, it isn't because I could and you couldn't. It's because I did and you didn't. You know? And so I do have a little bit of attitude in that aspect. For example, I'm a smoker. I'm smoking outside Building 1 on the Williamstown Road campus. And 3 women come up the sidewalk. I'm off the sidewalk. I'm trying to be discreet with I smoke, fully realizing that it's not only banned indoors, but outdoors on the entire campus. Right? And a woman says to me, smoking is banned on this campus. So it wasn't anything, it was authoritarian in nature, is the way I perceived it. And I said, well, I guess you need to tell security about it, which they probably did. But my whole attitude and outlook on this was, odds were overwhelming that not a single one of those 3 women ever served in the military. Okay. They didn't undergo the deprivations and the hardship and the injury that later gave rise to disability. They didn't go through any of that. I'll be GD if I'm going to have a woman or a man who hasn't served in the military tell me not to smoke outside a building. You know, I don't encounter those situations necessarily a whole lot, but I do know from my own temperament that sometimes my button can be pushed real quick. And that's just an example of how I perceived that I was being, the disconnect, if you will, between the civilians.
It's not really about smoking, though, is it? It's about
the schism between civilians and veterans.
and on that space, too. That's the VA where you feel you own that space in some regard, right? It belongs to the entire country, but it's there for you.
That's why civilians say that veterans feel entitled, because
Well, I do feel entitled. If that's what it boils down to, then I own it.
Well, I mean, the benefits are literally called entitlements. I mean, that's okay. That's what I've always said. That if people didn't elect the people that created the laws that made these benefits, then that would be different. But they
I mean, I earned whatever money I get from the VA. I earned the health care that I get. And in my mind, I've earned the right to smoke. You want to call that entitlement? It's an entitlement. But it's something that was earned. Entitlement is said in a derogatory fashion, like we gave you something for nothing. Right. And that's not the case here.
I feel the same way. When somebody says something to me in that fashion, I just follow up with, I'm sorry. And when they walk away, I continue what I was doing. So that people don't get the perception that I feel entitled.
I could have been more discreet about it. I could have said, yes,
I just don't want civilians to get the perception that
you are in a way
because of something I said.
Everything mitigates those civilian perceptions of what a veteran is. Like if you grow up with the mysterious uncle who served in Vietnam who doesn't talk about it, and they tell you don't go around them and say anything or make loud noises, you're going to think that's what a veteran is. All right, and if that's the only thing people see over and over on TV, in their family and in their rumors and their gossip, and that's what they're going to think. And
what's that movie that Al Pacino played in where he was a blind officer and Sound of a Woman?
Scent of a Woman.
Scent of a Woman. Thank you so much. Excellent film, I thought. In terms of maybe that was a good portrayal of the veteran civilian chasm or schism, where he's around his family and it's, his situation, his disability, if you will, creates difficulties as he responds to it in an angry way at times, I don't know.
It was portrayed a veteran, again, as complex, not simple. They had deep ways of thinking about things. They were not just anything simply. They were everything complexly.
There's just certain things I'm self-conscious about not to give that perception because people perceive it as a group. Some things I just don't care what perception I have. Certain things I know that people perceive it as a group rather than an individual thing. Some people just think it's an asshole for doing it.
Again, it's important for veterans to take ownership of these perceptions because if they don't, someone else will portray them in a way that will end up being how they're seen. So
after I read your book, I did come to realize, read it 3 times, slowed down, that I do and have engaged in impression management. But at the end of the day, I really don't give a rip what anybody thinks. the only people that I would care about is who signs my paycheck, and that's this nefarious person, Uncle Sam, who I don't know if that's a fixation portrayal of him or not, and whoever I'm sleeping with, and I'm not sleeping with anybody. So at the end of the day, I really don't give a rip when anything's in, and I'm in a spiritual program that requires me to be true to myself. Doesn't require me to be true to you or to be true to any nationalized notion of a veteran identity or anything else. But it requires me to be true to myself.
I think Travis quite agree. I don't care what people think of me, but I care what people think of veterans as a whole. I care less what people think of me as a person.
I find that, you know, among military veterans, there's a strong sense of right and wrong, there's a sense of purpose, and there's a desire to fix things when they're broken. And I think that comes again from the training. It comes from that collectivist a sense of belonging and purpose towards the people on your left and right. I think that's, again, a good thing. It can lead a lot of vets to get in trouble sometimes, taking principled stands within institutions that are not always looking out for their best interests. But a lot of times it is a precursor to veterans making a change for something better. You can look at lots of civil rights movements in the 20th century to see that. But I want to talk a bit about sociology in a different way. This is a paraphrase from the sociologist Charles Kuhl. It's got this concept called the looking glass cell. And I always like to talk about this because it's a really good way to think about things from the veteran's perspective, or from the civilian's perspective if you are the veteran. So what Cooley said is, like in any given interaction, it's not about me understanding myself, going into it with a good sense of that. It's not about who I think I am. You know, it's not about even like who you think I am. It's not about like anything about what you believe or what I believe. How I behave, how I interact with the world, my sense of meaning and value and purpose, it's defined by what I think you think about it. It seems like I'm just playing word games or whatever. Let's unbreak that. It's not about what I think. It's not about what you think, but rather it's about what I think you think. And so, RM, what do you think I think about you?
I know what you've said about me, and I believe you to be a genuine person. I mean, you've said that I'm authentic, curious, and humble. It's just, you know, my humility always needs a little bit of tune-up or requiring more of that.
Perhaps we're a bad example because I've actually had conversation, authentic communication with you. But again, imagine that we've never met. We're just two people on the street.
Okay.
You know, how do you think, again, impression management, how do you think people perceive you?
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that I have a female friend that I've gotten together with a few times, who is asserted, and I'm grateful for the courage that it must have, or could have taken for her to say it, which was, "Bob, you look like a crazy old veteran about to go off." And so, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. I mean, it keeps people at arm's distance, which is what I prefer most of the time, but it also keeps people from coming in closer than I might want to come in closer.
So you allow
it's a two-edged sword.
Do you think it's true?
That I'm a crazy old veteran about to go off? No. Well, I take it back. It depends on the triggering circumstances. Road rage is my worst.
Is that true of non-veterans?
I'm sure it is.
Okay, so you allow that perception to persist because it benefits you in some way.
Certainly, subjectively, I think so.
But you could correct, but you don't need to.
Well,
You don't have, I'm not saying you have to, but we do that. Let's, again, if we want people to think things about us, we can be active or we can be passive about it. You're being passive from what you're describing, right?
Say,
Passive about how you're perceived. You're not like saying, I am not this. Rather, you're just kind of letting it sit.
yes, correct.
Yes. I'm not taking a moral stance on it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's something veterans do. Yeah. But
is this little I am who I think you think I am, is that related at all to, I took one sociology class and I remember one quote from a famous sociologist.
probably not. You're like one of the most famous.
Yeah. his comment was, the imaginations we have of one another are the solid facts of society. Is that related at all?
I don't know that quote, but his book's called The Sociological Imagination. This is from, so.
It's kind of like if somebody, you see people that act certain ways, that people think that they're a thug, so they start acting that way because that's the way that society views them. And then you get somebody that actually gives them a chance and sees them as a good person, and all of a sudden that true, honest, good person comes out, and they don't try to portray themselves as something that society views them as.
That's a good point, Jason, because going back to this, the bottom one there, I don't think I touched on. Using authentic communication to form relationships was conducive to their success in the chronic community. What Parrott found, actually, they would let civilians read these articles about vets. One group would read, like, say, a group of articles about vets in which they're portraying stereotypical victims, charity cases, etc. And the other was an article in which the veteran had agency and they were unique and they were exercising control. And when civilians would read the latter articles, the ones in which the veterans were unique, they would be more likely to have what they call pro-social behaviors, meaning they wanted to form relationships with veterans in the articles. And so when they read the stereotypes, even if it was a hero, they didn't really find a way to connect and empathize in a way that made them want to continue that relationship. So those portrayals matter because veterans have to walk into those situations. And so what they're walking into then is mediated by largely, again, you said, Jason, 99% of people who've never served watching television. And we have our movies, which can be very helpful. I love Deer Hunter down there. It's one of my favorite movies ever. But then you have others, you know, like these are military veterans and their characters. Captain America, and you got Steve Rogers, the guy, he's like the hero, right? He jumps on the grenade even before he has his superpowers. And then you've got Frank Castle, who in the comics historically was a Vietnam veteran. And you can watch this show, and it's been recast for post 9/11 vets, but it's got New York City with Marines and all these special forces people just having gunfights in the middle of the city, robbing banks. You know, it's this portrayal of the vet as hyper violent, again going against, in this case, the state to right some wrong. And I found that theme, whenever I was doing my research into the Veterans Insurance film, occurred over and over and over and over and over again. All the way back to the first films about vets, black and white, was this common trope that the vet goes off to war, they learn the skills of violence and return home damaged by it. But then some injustice emerges from society and the vet is then compelled to return to their violent urges to make it right. That's what the Punisher is, and people see that and they identify with it because it gives them an excuse or whatever to identify with violent characterizations. And you'll see like the Punisher logo on the backs of cars and tattoos. And I mean, that's what that means. I mean, the Punisher is someone who was wronged by the people he fought for, and you know, he's got a lot of violent tendencies that he's going to make people pay. He's going to do justice. I don't know that we want people thinking that's how veterans are, and I don't think we want them thinking that's how Captain America is either, because both of those are stereotypes. The real veteran is much more complex. You got Hurt Locker. We try to get a bit more complex view of vets, but even that one, you know, it's kind of weird because as a vet watching it, you've got this guy who doesn't seem to have any kind of chain of command. He can just kind of run off base and come back on as he wants. And, you know, it does a good job of like portraying like the come home adjustment shock, but the military aspect of it was kind of like vet is an adrenaline junkie addicted to war, and you know just can't keep from going back to it. Again, that's true for some vets, but if you watch Hurt Locker and say I know everything there is to know about vets, then you've got a problem. Same as you watch Deer Hunter or Captain America or Punisher. All of these are fiction.
A good one. Again, there will be. Have you seen Con Air?
A long time.
So he's a special forces veteran in a bar. The female gets assaulted. He goes outside and takes care of him.
Yeah.
It ends up going to prison because he kills the guy on accident. And becomes a hero at the end.
You watch a TV show with a vet in it, you bet that's going to happen.
Well, he's the special forces hero they're celebrating his retirement. He's protecting females, goes to prison for it. It still comes out the good guy at the end.
Yeah.
And
It's a recurring thing. And other assumptions people make about veterans, like here's an anecdote. We were watching a show, me and my girlfriend Lisa, and it had a veteran character, and it was the dome. You guys ever seen the dome? Stephen King thing. Everybody's like stuck under a big dome, basically. It's pretty self-explanatory. And one of the main characters, is a vet. It's kind of mentioned, but naturally they give him the gun. He's walking along through the woods, and people sneak up on him. It's kind of an action show. And Lisa says, well, how come you didn't hear him? I'm like, well, he doesn't have superpowers. He snuck up on him. And so she assumed that because he was a vet, like he was just going to be able to hear better than everyone around him. In my case, I guess then the opposite. You got some sort of hearing damage or tinnitus or something. So, you make those little assumptions, and like a lot of times they never get pronounced on a conscious level. A lot of times they're compliments. Like, oh, I'm a super vet, I can do stuff. But sometimes that can be a lot of pressure too. Again, over time and cumulatively in little situations, like if you're not getting that chance to tell people who you are, instead those are being projected on you, I think it's to be problematic for your homecoming. I was going to do a paired share activity. I was going to talk through this though. Who wants to share a specific portrayal of a veteran in media that has stood out to you, and see if we can make it align with the hero or the victim stereotypes? Yeah, you already did. You did Con Air, Nick Cage. It's a good one too, by the way.
Could it be a movie?
Yeah.
Well, I do like the year on it. Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, Platoon. I guess I saw my share of World War II movies, growing up. But one that stands out to me was Michael J. Fox in Casualties of War.
I don't think I've seen that.
So here's this guy that Sean Penn's in it too. And, well, just lay it out for you real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're ordered out on 3 or 4, 5-man patrol, whatever. And they come across a village of, native civilians, South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, I don't know, South Vietnamese, I think. And Sean Penn grabs a couple of buddies, and they rape a Vietnamese girl. And Michael J. Fox is all about, no, this is immoral, don't do this. And he doesn't participate in it, but he's not successful in stopping the other men from doing this. And so they cart her off. I think eventually she's murdered in addition to having been raped. And Michael J. Fox tries to report this, up the chain of command. And the chain of command want nothing to do with it, So if memory serves, a lot of the movie is about, Michael J. Fox wrestling with his conscience over this atrocity that he didn't participate in, but witnessed. Just how he wrestled that, with his conscience back into, his life.
It's like a moral injury kind of thing, and being complicit, and complicating the view of war that makes it look clean, and as though there are no crimes on our side. Of course there are.
Right.
I mean, it's just a bad situation all around most of the time. That's a gross simplification, I know. But yeah, movies like that in which the veteran is really kind of working through something, really kind of give the audience a chance to humanize them. In this case, there's like a conflict going on with the, I would say, the My Lai narrative about the Vietnam era that committed atrocities in Vietnam, and those were kind of just swept under the rug, and so we've got these people out in society now. That was a negative stereotype for the generations that you may have had to have dealt with. Some vets would say, I never dealt with it once, and some would say, I dealt with it all the time. It's hard to say. No two people have the same experience, but that film, in a way, is like a conversation between public understandings of vets as war criminals and as human beings. It's mediating that understanding in some way.
Right.
That's important. Works like that. Works that don't do that, that amplify or otherwise simplify those narratives, work against them.
I always prefer movies that make me think. I always prefer movies that are, well, you know, deal with social issues and are on the cutting edge and you know, try to strip away. In other words, I go to be educated and spiritually uplifted rather than just be entertained. You know, and of course, you know, most of those, I mean, Rambo.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what a piece of cheese that is, right? Nothing real.
But that's how people view veterans. Like a lot of people's perceptions of vets was created by First Blood. You know, like they saw a vet with PTSD, like freaking out in that jail cell and going off on the National Guard. And that was a big threat. That's been a recurring theme, you know, throughout human history. As people go to war, society is very scared about what's going to happen when those people come back. They're not going to talk about that today. But if you look back further and further you look, you're going to see all kinds of attempts to control veterans, to make sure that they're not and bringing back the horrors of war to the home front. How about a personal interaction or portrayal that challenge stereotypes? Have you ever met an individual or been in a conversation with a veteran, maybe somebody in your family, in which they educated you rather than the other way around? About service specifically, exercise of symbolic authority? So if you did, like, how does that reshape your understanding of veteran identity? I mean, this is, again, homecoming, as I said, is a lifelong process. It's not something that just happens in a few days. It's something in which the veteran is constantly learning and relearning and growing as a person in relation to their service. That service changes meaning over time, over decades. Who they are change alongside it. And the thing is that the agency, the being in control is what matters. And so, we'll skip through the last question there, and I'll give you a quote here that I really like. A friend of mine named David Albright came up with it. If you know a veteran, you only know one veteran. Okay, so the best thing you can possibly do is to listen, not talk, but rather listen to the individual tell you who they are. Not bring into that conversation all kinds of assumptions about what they may or may not have been through, but rather come into it humble, authentically wanting to learn. And you really can't go wrong most of the time to do that. So here's what we kind of talked about today. And I'm going to have a few resources after this, but for the most part, we'll get close to the end. Veteran homecoming is a lifelong process, not an isolated event. Veteran identity is intersectional, so it's not just, you can't look at people in terms of just how they serve, just the way you can't look at them just in terms of their religion, their race, or other things. Rather, you got to look at them, all those things are coming together all at once, not one or the other. It's non-monolithic. Okay, so what I mean by that is, like, veterans don't all walk, talk, or think the same way. We don't all vote right. We don't all vote left. We don't all practice religion in the same way. We're all different. Many issues, I believe, faced by post 9/11 vets result from lacks of healthy examples. So those portrayals of vets as simplistic heroes or victims or even perpetrators, that is what vets are coming home to. And so for the young vet, me, whenever I was first getting out, or you when you were first getting out, if you were really trying to figure yourself out, and you were saying, well, I'm a vet, I've been in the military, what do people normally do right now? Apparently, like they're like the Punisher or whatever, that doesn't help me at all. So think about that. Stereotyping and patriotic myth-making compel vets to remain silent about their service, impeding the work of defining self. That telling of who you are is important. Same way little kids, whenever they come home from school, tell their parents about their day, they're teaching their parents who they are as a person. They're saying, this is how I react in that situation, how I want them to see how it reflects on my character. That's the same way. Everybody's the same way. And so, instead of understanding our vets in extremes, understand them as human beings. Storytelling or conscious portrayals of veteran identity in art, literature, continued service. You see all kinds of groups today of vets trying to get together to make a difference. Or even just one-on-one interactions allows veterans to decide the meaning of their military service and or exercise their symbolic authority. And that exercise is an important one because without us constantly affirming that right, and that power, and authority, somebody might try to take it away from vets, otherwise marginalize them or take away a lot of their hard-earned benefits. Here's some do's and don'ts that I think might be helpful. I don't know that I always agree with them all the time. I don't really like black and white thinking, but understanding lifelong process of homecoming, do recognize that veteran homecoming is continuous and complex. Don't treat it as a single event or assume you follow the standard path. A lot of times people have setbacks, or they'll have life events happen, or they'll learn something new. You know, somebody may come to you one day and they've had a strong opinion about their service their whole life, and they've suddenly changed. That's their right. It's their right to do that. Promote healthy examples of post-service identity. Do encourage veterans to explore various positive post-service identities. Don't oversimplify the issues faced by post-9/11 veterans by neglecting individuality. A great way to do here is to find mentors for veterans. Find people who are a little bit older and been there. They don't necessarily have to be a veteran sometimes, but sometimes when they are a veteran, that goes a long way. Avoid stereotyping and patriotic myth-making. Do be aware of how these can compel silence and impede self-definition. Don't force veterans into the extreme roles of heroes and victims. And when you talk about them or in the way, step back and really think about, is the way I'm regarding the person in front of me in this conversation, am I asking them to conform in any way? And if you are, step back and ask yourself one more question. How does that impact them? Fosters storytelling and conscious portrayal. This really undermines that. Provide platforms for veterans, like libraries, to express their unique experiences. I'm getting to do this right now. And meanings through art, literature, service, and personal interactions. Don't undermine or dismiss the symbolic authority and self-defined meaning. I see this last one a lot. Like these are well-meaning a lot of times, but like you go to a public event and people ask a veteran to come forward and they thank them. Well, they're also asking that veteran to endorse whatever the meaning of their message is. And so a lot of vets, particularly older ones, I say, get a little uncomfortable whenever they're carted out on a stage and asked to affiliate with a political message. I'm not entirely sure they understand the message or the people that they're affiliating themselves with. That can happen to young people too. It happened to me when I first got out. A for-profit voter will suck a veteran in really quickly. I encourage you to really research your charities and the places you're buying veteran merchandise and things and see where that money's going. If you think it's supporting vets, it's not always doing that. Facilitate authentic communication. Do engage in meaningful conversations that mediate veterans' perceptions of themselves and how they're viewed by others. And don't communicate based solely on assumptions or societal expectations. Again, it's about humanization. Educate and reflect. Do educate yourself about veterans' diverse experiences and reflect on your subconscious biases, and don't rely only on media portrayals or stereotypes. So take a look. It's in a book kind of way of thinking. So I'm going to walk through some of these resources here at the end. I really want you to think about these. I'm not trying to say this is all veterans. I'm going to talk about suicide rates among vets now and mental health. That's the minority of vets out there, but it's the people that we can really impact the most if we're being cognizant of how we speak and interact with people, and we're out there looking for a place to make a difference. So this is 2017. They've got new data out, but I haven't looked it up yet. The rate of suicide was 2.2 times higher among female veterans. The rate of suicide was 1.3 times higher among male veterans compared to non-veteran adults, compared to non-veteran adult women. So you can see this isn't veteran to veteran, it's veteran to civilian. So if you're a woman and you serve in the military, you're 2.2 times more likely to die by suicide.
Male veterans of 55 and older experience the highest feeling of suicide?
Yeah, it's a common misconception that young veterans are the ones dying in most numbers. Rates are alarming as all get out.
What?
But the numbers, like body count, is older veterans. Yeah, so when you look at suicide prevention methods, how old are the veterans typically in the messaging? They all look like even younger than me. And so I wouldn't think, just from watching the messaging, that older veterans were dealing with that kind of a complex issue, but they are. And older civilians are dealing with it too, for that matter. Drug abuse, suicide among older people is often attributed to just deaths from old age. They don't want the family to know because of stigma. And they'll sweep it under the rug and make it look like grandpa died of old age or whatever. In fact, they died by suicide. And that's true of all demographics of suicide.
Well, I made an inference based on limited information, and some of the information that I had might not have been accurate, but that blows me away.
Well, this is straight from the VA. It's what matter how you portray it. So I can take a fact and I can blow it out of proportion to support my narrative, but you got to put it in context.
Right.
So my thing is like, you look at rates. This is all people talk about. It's important because you got to pay attention whenever a certain group of people, young people, are dying by suicide faster and faster and faster than their peers. If you just think it's because like a simple reason like war, well, a lot of those vets are in their first year of service and they're deployed. The reason they die by suicide is because they're not adjusting well in military life. Or there's a lot of complex little narratives in there like that people don't really think about. And again, if we put on blinders like that, we're not going to see those peripheries. We're going to see those people that are struggling for other reasons. I don't know if you're a fan of lethal means access. You can get those gun locks, but 69% of veteran suicide deaths are from a gun. So the idea between lethal means access as a prevention measure is just simply remove from the equation as much as you can, and then the veteran has more time to think about the decision. I have a video here. I do trainings in QPR, which is question, persuade, refer, assist, and I have this video from assist. But if you see the top there, it's Rebecca Thomas is someone who does suicide prevention at the Lex of the VA. 988 is what's cut off there. That's the suicide prevention hotline. I think veterans just dial 1 when they call. But let's see this video real quick. I don't think the video is going to play. It's all right. The point of the video is that it highlights a lot of things you may not think about. The key thing is, in all these trainings, is that you have to move beyond those superficial interactions to save a life. Question, persuade, refer is about basically asking a question. If you're suspicious about someone being suicidal or having suicidal thoughts, ask them. Because that fear of embarrassment does not outweigh the consequences of not asking. And often people who are in this state are thankful. Research has actually shown all that to be true. That you're not going to drive someone to suicide. You're not going to ruin their life just by asking a question. In fact, you're going to come off as concerned. So that's what QPR is. Again, this isn't the class. I encourage you to take that. But assist is about helping people by listening to them, tell them why they got to where they're at, helping them find a way forward, and being there for them along that journey. Instead of just passing them off to someone else or giving them a phone number, really take the responsibility that's confided in you. And thinking about suicide, they've been giving you a clue just there, that they want help. They didn't have to say anything, but they told you for a reason. So assist, QPR, SAVE, which is the VA's way of looking at this. It's all about taking personal responsibility for the people in your life. And if Americans, or any country really did that, we would have a lot lower suicide rates, I believe. So SAVE is like signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. Ask the most important question of all. Are you going to kill yourself? We don't say commit suicide anymore. You might know why.
It's not a crime.
That's right. It's like you commit sins, you commit crimes. And so if that word is just a small way of like changing the conversation by saying, it's not a crime to admit it out loud. You're not bringing shame on anyone or anything like that. Rather, it's some people will say complete suicide, like it's something that takes process over time. I typically just say died by suicide. There's no stigma attached to that. It's very true and plain to the point.
Okay, so the difference between kill yourself and commit suicide is the social stigma attached to two phrases that mean the same thing. It's a derogatory thing, or
Sometimes
a crime or a sin to commit suicide, but it's more socially acceptable to use the phrase kill yourself. Is that what I got out of that?
I don't think either one of them are socially acceptable. That's the problem.
Okay.
But committing as a word is associated with sins and crimes.
Okay.
We say commit suicide probably because it is a sin, or it was viewed as a sin among major religious entities for a very, very long time.
Right.
And people would not even admit that they had family members died by suicide because of that. People certainly wouldn't admit they were having suicidal thoughts
Right.
because then that would reflect on their character in terms of, first, there's a whole lecture about that.
How well the family raises people.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah, it was tied to like early views of hysteria among women and how that kind of came across as like mental instability was viewed with femininity and was viewed with weakness. That was sexism baked into crap psychology, baked into stereotyping. So that got
with some of that in the book. Yeah.
that got put on to returning vets who were first diagnosed with PTSD as a moral weakness, as a failing, and families didn't want people in their family to have PTSD because they were a symbol, not only of their country but of their family. That's a lot of pressure for someone. So validate. They did not validate those veterans' experiences at all. They didn't start talking about this stuff openly until my generation came out. After you validate, you encourage treatment and expedite help. There's the website for the Lexington VA. They'll come and give the SAFE presentation to you. If you want to do one here in Lexington Library, they will set it up and give it to you. It's just health-services, suicide prevention. Here's some good things from their SAFE presentation I borrowed. I just took it off their own slides. When talking to a vet at risk of suicide, remain calm. Listen more than you speak. This is for anyone. Maintain eye contact. Act with confidence. Do not argue. Use open body language. Limit questions. Let the veteran do the talking. Use supportive, encouraging comments. Be honest and let the veteran know that there are no quick solutions, but help is available. A lot of that kind of lines up with what I've been saying the whole time. Just stepping back, listening, patient, letting the veteran have an opportunity to decide for themselves what things mean and being there for them long term. Not just saying thank you for your service, going about your day, but rather authentically being a human being. All right, that's all I got. Stay in touch. You all know who I am.
Thank you very much, Travis, for presenting this evening.
Any questions or want to unpack anything?
What's next for you?
I just left DKU. I'm slowing down to focus on my health. And I do stuff like this hopefully into the Kentucky